Welcome to the Velvet Door. And at this door inside, we talk about all things that are worthy. And of course, I am your host, SJ. And the topic that we're going to talk about is Trump's platinum plan. But there's one particular area of the plan I want to focus on, and that is the area of education. So, in the section of education, I am going to read some of the promises that he has in his $500 billion plan, and I'm just going to say my concerns. And this can actually go for both candidates and any other local politicians for the future. So I'm going to read the first section, and that is the education for African Americans can choose. Federal, state, and local community partnership to close failing schools to replace with full school choice and education opportunity to put American parents back into control over their children's futures. Next, increase child care tax credits and provide greater access to quality preschool. Next section is going to be the education for African Americans can afford. And I should have noted that the last section I just read was the education that we can choose, okay? That was all about choice. This one's going to be talking about money, financials, and what we can afford. Now, it says, first one, continue to protect the vital role of historically Black colleges and universities. Spur innovation ecosystems by connecting minority institutions with the federal government's broad range of scientific and engineering research and development. Increase the amount of Pell Grants and allow for vocational employment. And second, change home commerce. And the last one is advanced targeted apprenticeship and job training programs. Okay, so I'm just gonna come with my own opinion. This is from my experience dealing with inner city youth and as well being an inner city youth. So, I'm not gonna just be talking for someone else. I'm talking for the little girl that was me, that grew up in these environments. And as well, I do have close friends who are public school teachers, especially here in the New York education system, who have also been very vocal about their demands and complaints of what's lacking. All right, so let's go back to that first bullet and let's see what it says again. It says federal, state, and local community partnership and the closed failing schools replaced with full school choice and education opportunity to put American parents back in control over their children's futures. Now, my opinion on this is that they talk about school choice and basically they want to close the failing schools and basically replace it. So here's the thing. If you close the failing schools without fixing them and just give parents the opportunity to have full choice, meaning they can pick the best schools, how many schools would be left to house all of these kids that are in these inner city areas? Now, I'm going to talk for inner city areas because these are the areas that tend to have just the worst educational conditions, especially the public schools. So let's ask ourselves, if the failing schools are closed and now you have full school choice and education opportunity, can you afford the travel, the time for your child to go across town to another school that is deemed at a much more successful rate of having graduations? Can you as a parent as well, can you guys afford that? And for most families, I'm going to say no, okay? This is very, very broad and vague language, and this is why in these policies, people are just happy because they hear money. And trust me, money has been thrown at the public schools in these inner cities since decades. The question is, where is the money going? And if the money is going to the schools, why aren't we seeing the results from the students? And I'll tell you why. I want to read this stat from the brookings.edu, and it says, in a massive survey of urban education, Education Week concluded that most fourth graders who live in the U.S. cities can't read and understand a simple children's book. And most 8th graders can't use arithmetic to solve a practical problem. Slightly more than half of big city students are unable to graduate from high school in the customary 4 years, and many of those who do manage to graduate are ill prepared for higher education or the workplace. Performance is worse in high poverty schools, explain the Education Week editors, yet poverty is not the only reason for low performance. And I'm going to read another quote. It says, following that, somehow simply being in an urban school seems to drag performance down. Students in urban schools where the majority of children are poor are more likely to do poorly on tests than their peers who attend high poverty schools outside cities. So what exactly is this quote telling us? It's telling you that it's environment. Environment is the reason why a lot of private students aren't doing well. It's not that because they are just poor and they can't do well. It's because they're in environments where it looks poor, sounds poor, walk poor. Therefore, they then respond by thinking poor. That's exactly what it's saying. But here's the flip side to it, right? Because you'll say, okay, well, SJ, that would go right into Trump's school choice, right? They don't have to stay in these poor environments and poor schools, and they're just going to close down these failing schools and let them choose where they want to go. They don't have to stick around the impoverished areas and try to focus on the education. But here's where I have a problem with that. A problem with that is that when you start closing down these schools, you are then still left with a lot of students who are not going to have the ability to travel, to go to the schools of choice, and they can't afford to go to private schools, and hopefully they can go to a charter school, but the charter schools would then become overcrowded. So what's going to happen on the flip side of that is that these surrounding schools that are seen as being much better choices are going to start having standardized testing. Now, this is my own hypothesis, because how can you be able to have it housed thousands of students who are trying to get out of the one area to go to another area, and they're not trying to fix the issue that's just in that area? So you also say, well, SJ, the way how to fix the problem in those areas, but then we have to uplift the people. Then the parents are going to have to get more in tune, and they're going to need better jobs, and to see at home they need more money, and we should stop pushing the money into the community. So basically what you're saying is that we should push more what? Jobs? Because as we're seeing that we have jobs coming in, but the issue is that it's not you getting hired in these inner city areas. Yeah, more businesses are going up, but it's not always you that gets hired. So then what do we do next from there, right? So we say, okay, well, let's push more government funding. Oh, you mean welfare? Oh, you mean Section 8. So keep the people stagnant, so that if we just push more money in their hands, then they should be able to supply their kids everything they want. But aren't we living in those type of conditions already, where they're pushing more money into the hands of the citizens, and the citizens are still not able to have their children focus on a better environment because they're still poor? Because welfare does not always equal a better neighborhood, as we saw. The rise of welfare became the rise of ghettos and slums and trenches. So how can we further break this down? Because like I said, it's very vague language. And if you don't catch on to what politicians put in their policy, as we heard Ice Cube say that he sat down with Trump and helped him write this plan, if I'm not mistaken. So why is the education sector of this problem? Our children, who will be the next generation of adults, as we see already with online learning, our kids are being left behind. A lot of minority kids will be left behind because if they're already coming from impoverished areas, and when they go to a impoverished school, they still can't concentrate. What happens when they're in a impoverished household? And now they have to also rely on internet connection to go into school. And half of the time, from what I've heard from teachers, is that these kids are not even in tune with the lessons virtually. What's going to happen to these kids next now? What happens to the POC of the future? We're already seeing them being left behind. We're already seeing kids of all races and all colors in this country that are poor having to go to public areas just to get Wi-Fi connections. What happens when it starts getting cold outside? Well, let me go back to Trump's platinum plan. He does talk about putting more money, as it says right here. I'm going to scroll right to it. It says jobs, jobs, jobs. And at the bottom, it says invest almost $20 billion towards broadband and internet access to create job opportunities, improve classroom connectivity, and the ability to utilize telehealth services. Sounds good, doesn't it? So here's my problem with that statement. My problem is that if you want to improve classroom connectivity, and I guess that means you want to improve the Wi-Fi connections, but you still haven't said anything about improving real classrooms, improving the teachers, improving the quality of material, and proving that you are going to be promising the children of our tomorrow with a better way and a better know-how to learn. So I like how he tried to tie that in there, because then that kind of, later on in the plan, that's when you start reading about the education part and you're like, oh, okay, that sounds great. That sounds real good. I can get behind that. But like I said, the issue is that you still are not addressing the issue that no matter how much options that a person has, that if you're not going to sweep your doorsteps, okay, you're still going to have the same results. So what happens? Let's just say hypothetically, what happens? Trump wins and we start pressing him on his plan to follow through. And we say the education opportunity, full choice, perfect, okay? Well, me and about 10,000 other parents, we want to transfer our children over to the nice suburban schools. Is it possible? Do you really think that white America and white suburban areas are going to allow a bunch of minority inner city youth to be bused to their schools? Okay, do we even have the money and the funding? Because I didn't see funding for giving the kids school buses, giving them Metro cards, especially if you're in a place like New York City, where your schools provide you with public trans fares. That's not covered in this plan, right? So it's very broad language and very short language. So the next bullet, because I'm gonna dwell on that a little bit longer, but let me get to the next bullet. Increase child care tax credit and provide greater access to quality preschool. Sounds great, right? But okay, you want to increase the child care tax credits. Okay, that sounds nice, but here's the thing, okay? You're still not addressing what happens between ages pre-K to about grade 12. And as I just read, there is an issue with the 4th graders and even the 8th graders knowing how to read and do basic math. And this is why we have that no child left behind, and you got kids being pushed up. By the time they're in high school, they can barely do multiplication. Okay, still doesn't address the issue. You're just throwing money at babysitters. That's all you're doing right at that point, which is nice. It's nice because a lot of impoverished families are going to have to work full time. But just because those families have to work, that doesn't mean that we're still addressing the issue at large. Why do we have an issue here in America's supposedly a first world country? Why do we have an issue of our kids not being able to read properly in the 4th grade? What are we dealing with here, right? And this is no shot or no shade to any 2nd or 3rd world countries, but in America, where we pride ourselves of pride, and we're a country of showing progressive, but okay, well, why are we not showing any kind of progressivism in our education system? Like I said, once again, very vague, very broad language. But let's go on to the next section, okay? Because it seems like they just start to skip. They go from preschool and then they just go right up to college. Let's go to the next section. It says education African Americans can afford. All right. It says continue to protect the vital role of historically black colleges and universities. Okay, I'm assuming that role is a positive influence to a lot of black youth to see that there are a lot of educated scholars that come from Black universities, and that you don't have that disparity where people believe that if you come from a HBCU, then you are less educated. So I'm going to assume that's what that means. Next one, it says spur innovation ecosystems by connecting minority institutions with the federal government's broad range of scientific and engineering research and development. So once again, that sounds pretty nice. It sounds nice that they're going to be helping kind of get our HBCUs on board, I guess, with PWIs and being able to compete when it comes to a lot of your science and engineering platforms. Okay, sounds really well, but we're talking about college now, remember? We're in the college ages. So this is about 18 and up. So it says increase the amount of Pell Grants and allow for vocational employment and second change homecomers. Okay, so you want to increase the amount of Pell Grants? That's pretty good. You know, a lot of low-income families who may be minorities. Of course, it's about Black people, as they say, African Americans. They do have sometimes an issue with trying to pay for school. And of course, while paying for school, they're able to get a job and part-time, which is the vocational employment. I know about vocational employment because my mom has did it. And my mom, from the vocational employment, she was actually able to go and actually work for that company full time when she graduated. So the vocational employment part and the second change homecomers, that's really not anything that's groundbreaking. I mean, nice, you put it in there, but that's not groundbreaking, and it's still not solving any issues, right? And the fact that increase the Pell Grant amount, okay, I'll accept that. That is a change, and that will help minorities that have come from these backgrounds. So let's jump down to the last bullet. It says advanced targeted apprenticeship and job training programs. Again, broad, vague language. I mean, like, what does that even mean? Advanced targeted apprenticeship? What does that mean? You know, it's like, okay, apprenticeship. Like, all these people are, what are you gonna force companies to have more Black people in their companies as apprentice? And like, I don't get it. In job training programs, we have these already, right? We have them. But what use is all of that if by the time they go from pre-K to 12th grade and they graduate, they still can't read barely? So what's the sense of having all these different things where you're talking so broad? You're not even addressing the real problem. So that's why I gotta ask celebrities. You sat down with Trump, came down with this plan, this $500 billion plan. And the one important thing, one of the most important things, because after our generation comes the next generation, right? And you can never leave out children. And if you want them to succeed in this country, they must be able to compete. Doesn't matter the background they come from, because we hear a lot of the stories. I come from nothing. I didn't have a dad in my home. I didn't have this, but now look at me. I got money. I'm this, and I'm okay. We've heard that story a lot of times. And how many more times are we gonna keep hearing that story? How often are we gonna keep hearing that story, right? I mean, come on. We are the next generation, and as you said, we are voting for the next president that's going to be able to push through our agenda. So I'm just breaking down the part that I feel like everyone graces over, and I'm going to be doing a separate podcast where I talk about Black children and how it's really not protect Black women. It's not protect Black men. It's protect Black children. Protect their future. Protect them from the world, as we do in return try to give them an opportunity within this world. I'm very serious about this, and I'm very serious about the educational part. Because even as a mother to a young Black man soon, I have to be worried about if there's going to still be that racial bias. Will they still be trying to give my son all types of medications to calm him down, to sit him down in classrooms? I have to be worried about these things because I don't really see a change happening. as I would like. So I want to get into something new on this topic. Same topic, guys. And this is from the Atlantic. And this talks about how your middle class and people who are slightly above impoverished levels in this country are moving away from urban schools. Moving away, right? So they're not relying on school choice. As Trump would say, that is an issue that's going on with black people in their education system. No, they're not relying on school choice. The problem in this situation is that they are moving. They're just simply taking what they can, and they're taking their talents elsewhere, right? They may be going more rural. Maybe they're going to other not so rural but not so urban areas where the schools are. Everyone is at pretty much the same kind of impoverished level, but the schools are actually doing pretty well, right? Because as we saw in the last article, is that these kids who are just as poor as the one in inner cities, when they do go to schools in other places that are outside of inner cities, they are still excelling. They're still unlikely to drop out of school. So once again, we know that it's environmental. And as we know, you have to protect your psyche. You have to protect your energy, right? We tell ourselves that as adults. So how can we expect children that may not understand that I have to block out the world and I have to focus on the school. I have to block out what my parents are going through, block out the fact that we can't pay our bills, block out the fact that I can't have certain things for Christmas. Even some kids in New York City. Do you not know there's thousands of kids in New York City who are living in shelters? So I have to block out the fact that I don't have a home. I know I'm homeless. I live in a shelter. I have to block all that out and still focus on school. Do we really think that's possible? How likely of it? How likely? And this is why the ones that do make it out, we praise them so loudly. We praise them because it's not likely for that to happen. And to be honest, we don't see that changing anytime soon. So let's get into this article. Like I said, the urban school stigma. And in this article, they're going to basically talk about how a lot of your middle class and anyone that lives around a impoverished area are trying to basically flight. They're taking the flight. They're leaving. As we see more white people trying to come in and do gentrification, they're trying to remodel and try to remake the city into something. You have a lot of people who are like, listen, I have money. I don't have time. I have a family. I don't have time to deal with the luxury of the metropolitan lifestyle and cocktails in the evening and my laugh and I got this and I got no one cares about that, right? Once you start having a family, you start thinking about, okay, what are my core fundamentals? And sometimes the inner city lacks what you need and what you're trying to teach your children. So let me read this insert from the article. It goes, despite all this, urban schools are tipping severely in the wrong direction towards higher levels of segregation. In states like New York, Illinois, and California, home to the nation's 3 largest school districts, a majority of Black or Latina students attend schools that are 90% to 100% non-white. Students are increasingly segregated by social class as well. The average low-income student in the U.S. today attends a school where 2/3 of the student body is low income, a 28% increase from just a quarter of a century ago. Such schools are asked to do too much, often with too little, and the entire public education system is often marginalized by politicians and the public when they come up short. Many urban schools remain socioeconomically diverse, yet parents with means are increasingly wary of urban education, mistaking test results for a true barometer of school quality. They are increasingly opting for districts with better scores. All right. So let me add my little 2 cents on this little segment right here. And also when you read this article, it's going to talk about, like I said, the middle class fleeing. So it says 28% increase, okay? So the student body, more students on low income today than they were a quarter century ago. Now think about that. Think about that for a second. Firstly, the fact of the matter is that back then, see, when we think about a quarter of a century ago, we're thinking about, oh, it was so hard back then, and it was a lot still racism going on. You had the crack epidemic. That would be about 25 years ago. So we're looking at about the 90s and 80s, all right? And they're saying that from that time period, that we have not progressed as a nation. We have actually been on a financial decline, okay? But we have more children today growing up in poverty than we did a quarter of a century ago. And I think that can also play into the racial wealth gap, right? We know these are things that if you're knowledgeable about what's going on in the world around you, especially in your country, then you know that there is a huge transfer of wealth where the rich is getting rich and the poor is getting poor. And see, who's at the bottom of man and woman? It's children. Who's going to feel those effects? Children. And who's going to grow up to be the next man and woman? Those same children, right? So we're not even, yeah, you may have a smartphone, yeah, you may have nice clothes and be in a nice car, but a lot more people are poor today just by looking at these stats through our kids. A lot more children are growing up in more impoverished areas than you would say the 80s. And the 80s was crack. You had crack. You had gangster rap in the 90s. You had all these bad influences, school going to pure shits, and we are nowhere near as progressive as we think we are as a nation. So it says also that even though that these schools in inner cities are 90% to 100% non-white, meaning they're more so to be multicultural schools, right? With a small percentage of white people in them, white children in them. That even in a multicultural environment, that even when kids see other kids that look like them, because of the financial epidemic that's happening, they can't focus on having a better education. So let's tie this back in. How does school choice help again? If there's not a lot of options to choose from, and all you do is close these schools down. So you're not willing to go in the classroom and fix the actual problem. You're not willing to have maybe more social workers or have a certain amount of maybe state-funded tutors for these children. You're not willing to kind of put your hands out there and get your feet a little dirty to see really what's the disconnect. Even though we know that it's money, money is what's causing these children to be at the bottom. But I guess we can just throw out school choice. But like I said, with school choice is still going to come requirements, because those schools that are deemed to be the more top schools, top public schools, top private schools, top charter schools, they're not going to want to decrease their value by bringing in children who are coming from impoverished areas by the dozens and hundreds. Okay? And you don't want to sound like you're being prejudiced or anything, but that's just exactly what they're not going to want to happen. They don't want their standard scores to go down. They don't want their environments to start going down too, because as the students come in, then maybe the parents will start trying to come in as well. So you know that these suburban areas are going to fight back. They're going to fight back. These small towns that are outside of the cities, they're going to fight back as well. So what exactly did he address on education? All I see is jobs, healthcare, which is important. Healthcare, street safety, but the education is kind of like, let me throw a couple bullets in it just to say I care, but I don't. Because the way how you disadvantage your people is you lack of education and the lack of sympathy for where they're coming from, what they're fighting against. Now let's add in Biden's, let's say Biden wins though, right? Let's say Biden wins. We don't have to deal with this. But we have 11 million other immigrants that's coming in. We still have the same problems, right? We're still having to deal with the same issues. So I don't think that neither candidate has been really strong on the proposal for Black America when it comes to education. But let's get into Biden's plan for education and African Americans. All right, so let's get into Biden's Lift Every Voice plan for the Black Americans and African Americans in this country. It says, starting, expand access to high quality education and tackle racial inequity in our education system. Okay, now his is a little more drawn out. I'm not gonna read everything word by word. Okay, so the first one, it says provide high quality universal pre-kindergarten for all 3 and 4-year-olds, and that's very similar to what we had already saw with Trump, where you kind of want to have that early education going on with pre-K. I say the only difference is between him and Trump is that Trump is also adding in child care. So I'm going to assume that child care is for babies that are maybe 3 and younger. All right, so that's that one. Let's see. It says eliminate the funding gap between white and non-white districts and rich and poor districts in order to give students a raise and expand STEM curriculum in underserved school districts. Okay, it says Biden will work to close this gap by nearly tripling the Title I funding, the federal program funding schools with a high percentage of students from low-income families. Okay, so let me see. Let me go down a little bit more too. It says this new funding will be this new funding will be first used to ensure students at Title I schools are paid competitively. 3 and 4-year-olds have access to preschool. We said that already. And districts provide access to rigorous coursework, including computer science and other STEM subjects across all their schools, not just a few. Okay, so with this one, this point, the only thing, as I see, and let me not breeze by this. It said there's an estimate of 23 billion annual funding gap between white and non-white school districts today. Okay, so this is good. I do like that Biden was very to the point when he talked about the coursework, and he wants to add in the computer science and STEM subjects. I think that's awesome, being that these are things that are needed for future careers. And it also about the 23 billion annual funding gap. Yes, more white schools get more funding, and I also believe that a lot of white schools also have more people that privately put the money into them as well. So I mean, I think that would actually help, but throwing money at an issue, I don't really think that that's addressing the real issue of impoverished areas. So the next point, it says improve teacher diversity. All right, so at this point they're talking about the fact that a lot of our black schools, predominantly black schools and even Hispanic schools, you're still going to have a lot of white teachers, right? Sometimes Asians, and if you do have that one black teacher, they're probably from Africa, so they still don't have a Black American experience to understand and to be able to relate to Black Americans in America. So my point on this, to be honest with you, I don't think that there's a problem getting black teachers in school. I think there's a problem with people wanting to get in the profession. Like I've always seen on Twitter, people ask questions like, did you ever have a black teacher, and at what grade did you have your first black teacher, or at what grade did you have your first black male teacher? And I just don't feel like there has been a push for black men to get into the educational field, because you do have to deal with troubled youth. And I don't really see it being as pleasurable for men to be able to want to deal with troubled youth that you can't not discipline in your own way. But I have had male teachers. I've had American male teachers. I've had African black male teachers as well. So I mean, but it's always been a very little amount. But I'm not gonna say this. I think they should just be a push. It has to be more black men and women that want to be teachers. They have to go into the profession, and they have to go wanting to know that they want to go to certain areas. Okay, you have some people that are becoming teachers just because they're volunteering as tutors, and then they may tutor, not tutors, but but as substitute teachers. And because they substituted for so long, sometimes the school just hires them. I mean, I personally know people who are teaching subjects they have no expertise in, they just follow the curriculum. So being a teacher at an inner city school is not, it's not hard, okay? Yes, you still have to go to school. You may have to have some type of credential to keep on board, but at the same time, it's really not that hard, okay? More people have to want to do it, and I don't find people want to take their attention to deal with troubled youth. People do not want to sit and have to explain themselves over and over and over to children who just don't want to listen, who are coming from backgrounds that school is an outlet for them. They may not be getting attention at home. So when they get to school, school is now a playground for them. They're not here to learn. They're here to kind of just be a kid. I've heard plenty of stories where kids are basically parents at home. So when they finally get to school, they're able to just be a kid again. And the last thing they want to think about is coursework, right? But that still goes back to the issue of environmental. It's environmental, okay? So yes, you can add in more black teachers. That's fine. But to put it in your plan says what if no one is applying for the job? And if they're applying for the job, they don't last long. Teachers in urban cities, they have high turnover rates. And I think you can imagine why the turnover rate is really high when it comes to teachers, okay? Come on, let's just use some common sense here. But let's go to the next point. It says to reinstate the Obama-Biden administration's actions to diversify schools. All right, I'm gonna get a little brief sentence from this. It says education guidance that supported schools and legally pursuing these segregation strategies and recognized institutions of higher education interests and created diverse student bodies. Once again, if you live in a city, a lot of the time the schools are multicultural. If it's not multicultural, probably because that area is mainly black people that live in that area, or mainly Hispanics. But most of the time it's multicultural in the cities. But once again, it's still not addressing the real issue, because diversity still doesn't address the problems going on around the areas, right? All right, next. Ensure that African American students are not inappropriately identified as having disabilities. It's a good one. While also ensuring that African American students with disabilities have the support to succeed. It says African American students are 40% more likely to be identified as having a disability and twice as likely to be identified as having certain disabilities such as emotional disturbance and intellectual disabilities. All right, so you guys can read the rest of that, and it also talks about how people who are disabled that are black can still be able to succeed in life. Okay, this is a great point, right? I do believe this is an issue, but I don't feel like we're speaking more loudly about it. We talk about it, we expanded on this, but we have never really pushed to be against it, right? I love that Biden did put this in his plan, because this is a problem that we're having, especially with our young black males who are being labeled disabled just because they can't sit in a classroom, okay? They could be the smartest in the class, but just because they can't sit, now they have to get on Ritalin. That's a problem. Because what are the long-term effects of these drugs, okay? Some of these people are coming off of Ritalin and other things and then hopping on to the next drug, weed, cigarettes, anything to get the next fix, right? Anything to calm them and soothe them down. So they never really know how to control their emotions and control their body. And we're still not addressing the fact that some students have different learning styles. So in America, we still have not progressed to the point where we are trying to adapt for students who have different learning patterns, okay? And it also talks about the disabilities, a high quality education by fully funded individuals with disabilities. Okay, so that, I love the fact that he is addressing a problem that we do have in the Black community. We do have mentally disabled people, okay? We see them all the time. They're walking the streets and talking to themselves. They get hooked on drugs, and now they're your next junkies, or they stuck living with their parents for their whole life, and they never get a chance to experience real freedom, right? So I do love the fact that in his plan, he is talking about providing higher education for the disability people. So I would assume that it's not going to be just the basic foundation of learning shapes and colors and things. And I've actually used to volunteer to read to disabled high school students when I was in high school, okay? So it seems like he is going in the right direction. It's addressing a problem that we do have that we don't talk about. That's the mentally ill and the ones who are misclassified, okay? So let's go to the next bullet. Next point says address the African American student debt crisis. All right, so I'm gonna breeze by this because I feel like it's not just African Americans, but it's everyone that's going through debt. These schools are way too overpriced. But at the same time, like I said, you know, my focus for this video is about K through 12 grades, pre-K to 12th grade, up until graduation. We still breeze by that, right? Look where we're at. We're already in college. Under the Biden plan, we just scrolled. We just went. That was the first couple of bullets I read. That was for the schools at the age level that I'm looking at. And now we already jumped to college. So you see how there's still a disconnect in addressing the real concerns. All right. So at the student debt crisis, and like I said, you guys can read the plan. Make sure that you understand who you're voting for and why you're voting for, and if the problem is not addressed, that it's time for us to address it. It says increase college completion by making college affordable for African American students. Once again, more vague language, right? More vague language, right? I guess. Let's go to the next point. It says invest over $70 billion in historically black colleges, universities, and minority-serving institutions that will train our next generation of African American professionals. And actually, this is actually pretty good. Good. It says 40% of African American engineers and 80% of African American judges and are HBCU graduates. And I want to say hand clap to everyone who went to a HBCU. I always love HBCUs. I always love the energy, and I'm glad that you guys have stuck it out, even though there's been stigma behind it. I'm glad. But they want to make the HBCUs more affordable to their students. I think that's awesome. I remember one time I wanted to go to a 4-year, and I tried to go to the college at the time where I was at. That was at HBCU. The tuition was outrageous, and I really couldn't imagine taking out a loan to cover that tuition, you know? So I do feel like that is an issue, right? That is an issue. I chose to go a different route. I chose to go for something I was more familiar with, and I knew I could make instant money. And that was just me. That's my story, but I'm sure there's plenty of others who can relate to that. But I'm glad that they are talking about this. They also want to increase, invest $10 billion to create at least 200 new centers of excellence. I love the fact that they're trying to invest into the schools. They're not just throwing money, but they're being very, very precise on where the funding is going. That's awesome. Okay, let's go to the next one, because like I said, we still skipped over K through 12. Those are the core years of learning for a child, and we skipped them. Okay, it says create a Title I for post-secondary education to help students at undersourced 4-year schools complete their degrees. Once again, we still going off track, right? Make a $50 billion investment in a workforce training, including community college business partnership and apprenticeship. Still, listen, we're all the way in college, but I'm glad. Let me read a quick insert. It says these funds will create and support partnerships between community colleges, businesses, unions, state and local, tribal governments, universities, and high schools that identify in-demand knowledge and skills in the community and develop or modernize training programs, okay? Whatever that means, right? You will hope the programs would keep up with the times, but you know, I have lived in these areas where things were kind of outdated, you know? But you know what also that is very true? These schools are getting the funding, and this money is being stolen. How we got down to the bottom of why these inner city schools are getting the funding that they do need, but they still have teachers coming out their pocket to buy school supplies. Students are still having textbooks that are falling apart. I think there's some other local level issues when it comes down to funding in these schools that's not being addressed as well. And then it goes on to the healthcare sector of his plan. Okay, so that's it. I compared Biden and Trump's education plan. And as I said, my interest was for the pre-K to 12th grade, because as we know, the graduation rates for minorities, and I'm going to say by POC, but I'm going to mainly stick on the topic of my Black Americans, my African Americans, my Black people, whatever you want to address yourself as. So according to one of the most recent studies that they had did for 2018, the Black population in America, high school students, make up for about 6.4% in dropouts, okay? Which is actually lower than it was back in 2006. 2006, it was actually at 11.5%. So it's good to see that our students are sticking through and they are graduating more. And that probably could be also due to the fact that we had the No Child Left Behind Act. But they're still graduating and they don't know basic math. They don't know basic algebra. So what use can they be when they actually go to college? What use can they be, and how hard is that experience going to be if they're just being pushed through, right? So compare that to other races. We have Asians. Asians are at 1.9%. They are the lowest. And then next you have whites at 4.2%. Then we have 2 or more races. I believe that are people who are maybe mixed race. They're at 5.2%. Then you have your Hispanic population. They are at 8.0%, which is higher than our Black population. Then you have your Pacific Islanders, who are at 8.1%. Then your American Indian, Alaskan Natives, they're at 9.5%. Okay, so we're seeing that, we are making our progress, but what is the quality of the graduates? What is the quality of the people who are leaving schools and coming out into the world to find jobs? How can they measure up? And could this also be one of the reasons why people are choosing to go into more crime? People who are coming from areas where they're not doing as well when it comes to schooling, especially by high school. They can't even get their high school credentials. Are they going into other forms of work? This is something serious, and I would love to do more research about the Pacific Islanders and also the Alaskan Natives and the Native Americans about their percentage rates as well. But I had to come on here, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we have work to do. We have a 6.4% dropout rate in America, and we want to get that down. Okay, we want to get this way down because we have all the tools and the resources, but we do have students who are being discouraged. And as we said in the beginning of the video, they're being discouraged because of environmental factors. Because even if a child is smart, if they're in an environment where it's not as doing well as other environments, they are going to start to mimic their environment. Just cause, this is studies. This is professional studies. They're seeing this. So no matter what you try to put out school choice, once again, you still are going to make it to a new competitive avenue now. Because everyone is going to want to try to go to these nice schools, right? Everyone is going to try to find a way to get this, especially if you're in a city. If you're in a city, you're going to get a Metro card. You're still going to try to go. Well, what are going to be the new requirements to get inside these school choice schools? Okay? So let's think about this, all right? And I thank you guys for tuning in to the Velvet Door. We're inside. We chat about all things are worthy. And like I said, I'm your host, SJ. I hope you guys like my commentary. And I want to hear your opinions about this. Do you think Trump or Biden has their hands full when it comes to Black America? That is so full that they forget about the Black children in their education? Because remember, they're going to be the next generation. And is virtual schooling going to increase dropout numbers? Think about the attention spans. How many children are going to be able to last for as long as this pandemic? How many children are maybe going to be pushed forward and still lacking the basic skills that they need? So I want to hear what you guys think. Write it down below in the comment section. You could like this video, dislike if you don't disagree. And if you disagree, I also want to hear your opinion down below. And subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'm going to see you at the next video.